Welcome to the Hope on the Hard Road podcast, where you and your family can find community, find encouragement, and find hope for the road ahead. Before we get started, we want to let you know that we are about to celebrate our 5th annual date night for caregiving couples on February 15th. And if you're in the San Diego area, we hope you'll join us for this night of dinner and dessert, awesome speakers, and lots of fun and prizes. Just go to hopeonthehardroad.org and sign up now, and we'll see you there.
In this space of entanglement, our deepest cries mix with our purest form of love for another person. And we find ourselves able to live in the space between heaven and earth, where the paradox of sadness and peace can coexist.
Hey guys, we begin our family series with an episode dedicated to all of the amazing siblings out there. If you are a sibling of someone with special needs, we want you to know that we see you and we celebrate you. Siblings often miss out on a lot in life, and yet siblings also often become some of the most empathetic and caring people we know. On this episode, our guest, Camille Block, sibling, career coach, and author of Hope for Secondhand Suffering, Tools for the Heart When You Can't Fix Your Loved One's Pain, speaks with us on what it's like to be a sibling. As conservator, advocate, and voice for her beloved brother, Kevin, who lives with cerebral palsy quadriplegia, Camille felt called to write this new book to help give a voice to silent sufferers and connect people to their purpose. Let's listen in to our conversation. Hey, Camille. Oh my goodness. It is so good to have you on today. This is going to be amazing.
Glad to be here, Kristen and Eric. So much fun.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you. You know, you really have a unique perspective for our audience, and we're really glad that you're able to share that with us. You know, for our audience, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and, you know, the special needs aspect of it too?
You know my name, Camille, and I am the oldest of 3 children. I was raised, born in late 60s, I will say that. And that's relevant because of a lot of things we'll talk about today. But I have 2 younger brothers. My middle younger brother is 3.5 years younger, than I am. And my little brother is 5 years younger than I am. And so I was the oldest. We were raised in Southern California. And currently I am now a mom of 3 adult children, all in their 20s. And my oldest is married for 6 years and 2 girls, and my youngest is a boy, empty nester for the most part, and married for 34 years. And met my husband in college at Pepperdine University. So that's a bit about my bio, I guess.
I just love your story, just your family's dynamics. I love it. Camille, today we're talking, this is our sibling series, and we're talking with siblings because we know that you each have such a special voice into this world. And you've written a book. It's called Hope for Secondhand Suffering. As a matter of fact, I have it right here. It's a beautiful cover, by the way.
Thank
Love
you.
it. Love like the double hearts, because I know there's such special meaning in that. And but as we talk about this subject, we'd love to know, what was your experience as a sibling? You know, what's your background with that? And can you share your story and what brought you to the point of wanting to write the book?
The story is when I was, born a quote normal, typical child, and got a lot of attention and just, great loving parents. And then when I was 3.5, my brother Kevin was born, and the journey kind of began there with kind of why I wrote the book. My brother was diagnosed with severe. Well, at the point as a baby, you don't really know how severe, so those things progress. But he was diagnosed as something was not right, and then over the months, my parents found out that he had cerebral palsy, and I knew I don't remember a lot about that time, obviously, but I do remember that there was some sadness, deep sadness. And then as he failed to progress a lot of the milestones, it became obvious that he was special. And that was the word they used back then, believe it or not, before special needs was a word. They told me my brother was special. And, he was very special, and I was very connected to him. And And I actually begin the book talking about how I remember, holding his head up. His head always drooped to the right, and I would hold his head up while we watched Sesame Street, and that was my job. And I just had this incredible heart connection to Kevin. And then the story progresses that when I was 6 years old, I had the shocking and really horrible news to me as a sibling that they were going to put well, actually, it wasn't horrible at first. They put him in a day program, 5 days a week, and where he would go kind of far away. And it was kind of sad. Like I remember just thinking, why does he have to leave? And then that evolved quickly into there was an opening at an institutional facility that was very loving. They were told if you don't take it, you may lose that spot. And it was through an organization called United Cerebral Palsy Spastic Children's Foundation, and it was all children. And the doctors told my parents, he will never know any better. He should be with people like himself, and you should just focus on your other two kids. By that time, I had a little brother that was born, and my mom was kind of overwhelmed with it all. My dad had to work. He's a professor at Pepperdine University, and money was not our thing. We were we were fine, but we didn't have the ability to hire and help and all that thing. So my parents hit a limit, and they were advised by many people to place him in this home. And so that really was kind of the trigger, I think, for what when I look back, like what kind of like was that beginning of that journey. So over the years, we visited my brother, and the book tells more of that story. I didn't really realize the effect it had on me at the time. I didn't understand. I did feel like I lived in two different worlds, though. One world was, I went to public school. I was just a normal kid. And we often, at first we started having family portraits, with all of the kids, including my brother Kevin. But as he aged and things got more complicated, we started leaving him out of family photos. And I remember that's when my heart was like, why can't Kevin be here? And it just became awkward. And it's almost like I felt like I was living two different lives. And I had to be one way to people at school and another way when I was with my brother and family, like my real self. And so anyway, I that's kind of like how I grew up. As far as why the book, well, I didn't plan to write a book. That was never in the cards. Never thought I could write a book. I never considered myself a writer. But the story kind of unfolded when I had dropped off my oldest daughter at college, and it was very emotional goodbye. My husband had been commuting long hours to like 2 hours away each way, there and back. Our family was just not in a great place at that time. And I was just sad to have my daughter leave. We were very connected. And then 2 weeks later, my mom had a surprise massive stroke. And 5 days later, she was gone. And so all of this happened within 3 weeks. And I just found myself in this deep state of grief, which led to somehow me at a computer typing with tears running out. And what came out was really my life with my brother, Kevin.
For the listeners that are listening in that maybe of a younger generation, I mentioned we're in the same generation. Things were different.
Mm-hmm.
We did not have the Lantermans Act and regional center really at its strength or even existing really, and so families did not have the support that they get now purposefully to help them keep their individuals at home with them, and also just. It was a different time and age, the advice that families received.
Yeah.
And so it's very understandable that this is a part of your story, and loss and grief.
Yeah, it's definitely a journey that so many of us experience. If you have a child with special need, you have a sibling with special needs, there's this expectation of what you envision life to be, and then it presents itself and it looks differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I completely appreciate that, when you're telling your story, how transparent you are. You had feelings about, your brother, and yet it was kind of like pushed aside in some ways because we don't really want to broach that subject because that's the decision we made. Yeah. And yet you can understand from a parent point of view, and we've been in a place where people try to pressure you into the decision that seems like the right way to go, and that's a hard place to be in. Obviously that's you respect that idea, but there's some real feelings regardless of it. There are some real feelings, and I appreciate how much you identified with your brother on an early age, and how that plays into, you writing a book and you being able to share that part of the story. You felt the loss of, why is he not around us? Why do I feel like I have a duplicity in life about this? We get that. We understand, some people You can just leave her at home, or, in terms of our daughter and so forth like that. I totally understand. Not everybody gets it, and how transparent you are. Obviously, there's a lot of challenges you could talk about, but is there something that stands out, one of your biggest challenges of being a sibling with an adult now, with special needs?
The hardest part is this concept of secondhand suffering. Honestly, that's the that's the gist of the book. And it's a feeling that I think anybody has when someone you love suffers, you suffer too. I mean, if you truly love someone and they're in pain, and I mean pain metaphorically, but also could be physically, in the case of my brother, you hurt, you suffer because you have empathy, or you feel, you almost feel their feelings. And so I'd say the hardest thing is secondhand suffering, which I have been able to label and give language to. I'd say the other thing is just, as a child, you don't have that burden. It's your parents' burden, and there's a little bit of an edge taken off. You feel for them, you love them. I mean, I remember like crying like he would cry when we would visit, and then like he would get excited when we'd see him, and then he would cry when we'd leave, and I would be the last one to leave. I couldn't take it. Like I was the last one to leave. Something strange was connected us, and so I cried when we left. And everybody's else moving on, talking about what they're going to get for lunch at the drive-through. And I'm like, do you not feel what I'm feeling? And so that I did feel that as a child, but I didn't feel the burden of making the decisions. I didn't get a vote. As
Mm.
an adult, I now am a co-medical conservator with my dad, or co-conservator. My dad's pretty much abdicated to me. My mom is no longer here, as of 11 years ago. And even then, I was starting to kick it up a notch. And so I feel like now, in a way, I'm more than a sibling. I'm a parent. I've taken on a parent role. And so, when I see your organization, and it's focused on, a lot of it is the parents, which is wonderful. My parents didn't have that. But I'm thinking those siblings are also going to be, quote, parents one day,
Right.
most likely. If the special needs sibling is, blessed to continue life. Um, so I think that the hardest thing now is realizing that, I have this burden, which is also a blessing, and my voice is finally heard. So I've been able to make a lot of great decisions in the last 5-10 years that I think multiple times have helped my brother tremendously. Everything from life and death to the little things like, a certain mouthwash that works, so that his this yellow stuff won't happen in his mouth. It's like it's a blessing, but it's changed for sure.
Camille, thank you seriously for sharing the real and the hard and the good. We do often think of siblings. There is a lot to prepare for
Wow.
as families, right? Being in the position that you're at, having a brother that is, well into adulthood. What's the relationship like at this point? How's it evolved? What have you learned from this experience?
I think that many of the lessons I've learned are things that I needed to learn as a person anyway. Things like I can trust my gut.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of times my instincts have been right in the face of doctors saying completely opposite, or nurses or caregivers or administrators. I'm dealing with a layer that many parents may not be dealing with if they're able to live with their loved ones. And so I've had to learn that I am a voice for my brother who's voiceless. He is nonverbal. He does have a working brain, however, just throwing that in. I always like when they say he's labeled as intellectually developmentally disabled, I'm like, no, he has a brain in there. It's just locked in. He can't talk, can't communicate because there's more to cortex, but he's fully in there, and you can tell. Everybody who knows him can tell. So I just throw that in there. But I think learning that I am empowered to have a voice for him who doesn't have a voice. I can trust my gut. I have instincts that are valid and that have proven time after time again to be right, that have benefited my brother, things like oral gratification because he's on a G tube, or things like knowing what procedure to do when, knowing what vitamin he needs, or knowing how to like fix his G tube formula when nobody could figure out what was causing him pain. And I researched the ingredients, realized, oh my gosh, this is not good for him. And so I think that being empowered to trust my instinct, trust my gut, and then advocate.
Yes.
proactively that I can make a difference. I can't fix everything. And that's the subtitle of my book, I think is important that we haven't shared, but it's Hope for Secondhand Suffering: Tools for the Heart When You Can't Fix Your Loved One's Pain. And I
Mm,
think it just makes it more complete because for me, the most important lessons I've learned is my heart and
Mm.
how to guard the heart and my journey towards hope, because you go through a lot of stages, of grief and things like that. And I think the other thing I've learned along with trusting my gut is just asking the hard questions and not being afraid to press into the pain, because sometimes we can't progress. We get stuck unless we're allowing ourselves to go through the suffering, go through the hardship, to feel my brother's pain. Because if I didn't embrace that pain, that when he was screaming in the hospital and nobody could figure out what was going on, I don't know that I would have done the research to figure out a solution. I would have done like everybody else. Well, we don't know what's going on. You just give him a drug and like move on, like take care of your own family. And I wasn't willing to do that. And so I think you're free to make a difference when you can allow yourself to feel another's pain.
mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
The
good.
the message I just hear that you sharing is your empathy for your brother, which then is a catalyst into you, advocating for him and seeking out the best. And you mentioned he's nonverbal, but obviously he's communicating a lot and you've
Mhm.
connected on a lot of levels, which is huge. And you're able to understand kind of his needs and what his aspirations are and so forth like that. That's really huge. So you've shared a lot of this on just over the last few minutes, but having a sibling like your brother, how's it really impacted your own life, and maybe also share how it's impacting your family right now, and what's the future look like, and
Yeah.
putting all those things together.
I guess to really answer the question, you'd have to ask my husband and my kids and my
Wow.
dad, and to understand the impact. But I think one thing that probably is common among siblings that I'll speak to that has affected me is guilt
Yes.
and the feeling of why him, not me. And, growing up, I think I felt that a lot. In fact, growing up, I always was worried about one day getting married and having children, because I assumed, well, God's just going to give you a disabled child because now you know how to deal with it. And that was my view of God. It's like that's changed. So I think that overcoming guilt and that is a process. I still deal with it, but that's one way it's affected me. And sometimes, like when as an adult, like with my own kids, I've had to make hard choices. There's sometimes where, I tend to rush down if Kevin's going to the emergency room or there's a big issue. I tend to feel like, well, I got to drop everything and go fix it. And sometimes I've learned, you know what? I've got another kid who has a need right now, or my husband hasn't seen me in a long time. I need to put his needs first, and I need to like either get help or I need to let it go and know that somehow Kevin's going to be okay, and pray. I can't do it all.
You just nailed something that's really common, and I love how you shared that, is that you
Mhm.
can't balancing. You try to balance, you do the best you can, but you also have other people in your life that have to take a priority as well. Your husband and your own family, and that doesn't mean that you disregard your brother's needs, but there's a balance, and seeing, evaluating each circumstance and is what is the greatest need at this time. They're all
Right.
needs. You could be
Right.
you could be incredibly useful in all those places, but what is, evaluating. I think that's really good advice for, our listeners, is evaluating what is the strongest priority when you're making those decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is great advice. We've talked about a little bit about advocating for your brother, and
Mhm.
then this balance aspect that we just talked about. What does sort of a daily look into what you're doing with your brother look like, right? How are you supporting him now that he's an adult? What does that look like for you and for your family?
Yeah. Gosh, it's like, which example can I pull from?
Yeah.
But some current ones right now. I'm always working on something. I'll give you two examples. One more heavy and one more not. But the heaviest one I think was when my brother had to go to the hospital and skilled nursing combo for an 8-week straight period with really bad aspiration pneumonia. and a mysterious unknown symptom that they couldn't figure out what was causing him to scream constantly.
Mhm.
And during that time, my dad and I would take shifts of staying with my brother, and I have another brother, but he had a young baby at the time, so he could only help out every so often. So just like staying with him and being the one that would go get the nurse, or like he needs his diaper change. He needs, he like I mean, you name it, he had a need. And so nobody could leave him, especially in skilled nursing. They have so few ratios of nurse to patient. So it was just constantly being there. And it was trusting my gut, knowing that no, this screaming, that thing, there's something causing that. And when everybody says, like, we don't know, like, done all the tests, he's, can't find anything, it was like, well, no, we're going to pursue it. We're going to find it. So that was a very extreme example. And then kind of like another one that was kind of extreme was when he went on hospice during those COVID times. He recovered from COVID tremendously well, because I had to advocate for a certain treatment plan, and I had to go all the way up to the chief medical officer of a hospital. I just laid it all down, and I got something done that nobody was getting done. And he was fine after that. But during COVID, there was a whole lot of things that were really hard that I had to advocate. We couldn't see him for 14 months, straight. And so that's a whole heavy topic that really brings up like that warrior spirit in me. But on a lighter note, just like currently a day in the life is I've been working on, finally got his money out of regional center that had been accumulating for 4 years that he didn't have access to because of bureaucracy. Nobody was in the right position, just like nobody returns emails, just all that stuff with public health and regional. And there's a lot of things. And so I was able to finally get his money, and we were able to buy something called a gait trainer, which is like a walker. And he can't walk or anything like that. But I wanted him to get upright because I felt like this would be a wonderful thing for his digestive or his G tube. It'd be a quality of life thing. There's all these reasons. So I did it. And we worked so hard, finally paid cash, got this thing, and he did it. And then there was an issue the way he was positioned. He got bruises on his arms.
Mhm.
So I'm currently they banned him from that, reported him to public health, and like it's a big thing. They could lose their license. And so it's like you have to like, okay, everybody take a breath. We're gonna fix this. Because
Yes.
this is a fun thing. This is a good thing. And I wanted to really give him this gift of like getting upright because he's been in a wheelchair forever, and maybe get his legs out from atrophy and just maybe feeling again, And so anyway, I'm in the current battle of, it doesn't feel as heavy because it's not life or death. It feels bonus, but I'm in the battle of fixing that with the right people to get everything adjusted right so he can use it again. And it just involves a lot of meetings, a lot of just going down there. And then when I'm down there, there's always something that comes up. It's like, okay, where's Kevin's lunch? Oh, they
Mhm.
somebody forgot to make it, or oh, well, we'll just blend up a ham sandwich. No, he doesn't like blended up ham sandwiches. Would you like to eat a blended up ham sandwich? And so I'm like having to like go to the meal plan and like, okay, who's in charge of this? And it's just like it's just a lot. I don't do that every day. I don't. I have my own life, but it's when I go down or visit or when we're in the battle. There's always something.
Yeah.
But that those are like some of the extremes of the things that I do.
No, that's great to
Mhm.
hear because our families, again, raising siblings are wondering what's it going to look like, you know, right? And then siblings that are dealing with it like
Mhm.
you are, they're like, that's validating. This is what we go through. We're working, we have our own families, and we're spending time on emergencies or urgencies or just going to see our sibling as, we would hope everyone would to be part of their lives. And it's a lot.
It's a
It's a
lot.
lot. And it's
Advocating
very
is
beautiful
a
for you to yeah, share your
yeah,
story.
advocating is a full-time job in and of itself, and I just
Yeah.
appreciate how much you're sharing and not just the big things, which are definitely there, but also little things like, would you want a sandwich like that?
Right.
Like, come
Right.
Right.
those seem like a little thing, but they're not. It comes back to that thing we've talked about earlier, is that empathy for your brother, and then using that as a catalyst to advocating for big
Yeah.
and small things. So probably kind of like piggyback on
Hmm.
that whole concept. How has this impacted you, having a sibling, having a brother, on, the bigger community maybe of influencing people to understand inclusivity and accessibility, in our society as a whole?
I think in my situation, it's been so unique because he hasn't lived in a home
Yeah.
with us, and he's been separated.
Mm.
And there's a big move right now in the disabilities community to really get them more mainstreamed and more out and about. And my brother's pretty severe. So like a lot of my examples may be overwhelming to people. And I just want to say, like, he's probably the most severe in terms of disabilities, needing full-time 24/7, like can't even, do anything with his hand. I mean, it's just pretty severe. So don't, like, everybody don't worry. Not everybody's like this. I'm not one to speak about him being really included in much. And I do think there's change, especially people in institutions or care facilities, so many changes. One is just the increase of pay that we need for our nurses and our direct care staff. These people are saints.
Yep.
They are saints. They could be working anywhere else and they could be working at In-N-Out and possibly getting more money right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And, well, not the nurses, but the direct care stuff. And these people are changing diapers. They're giving medicines. And they can't. They're just so much. There's only so much you could do. So when you're in a home like that, so I feel like that's a change that needs to happen. And another change is just I see that, like with my brother, when he was a child, up until age 21, he had funding for a lot more, I think, than he has now, in terms of, they did field trips. Like, he would go to Disneyland. He would have adventures to do. They would go on they would just do more interesting things. And that was one of the reasons my parents placed him, is like, oh, it's almost like day camp. It's like, oh, that could be fun. And unfortunately, after he turned 21, there's a lot of services that kind of went away. And because I still was living my own life at that time, and getting married and living in another place, I'm not aware of all the discrepancies, but I do know as an adult, they're not treated the same as children. There's a lot of people who have compassion on disabled kids, but when you get to be an adult, the empathy and the fundraising and the excitement, it all moves back to the kids. And so he had a walker, for instance, when he was a kid, and they would use that in day program, and his legs would move, and I have a video I found that he was so excited. And after 21, like, he kind of just stayed in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And 53 now, and no wonder his legs don't work. No wonder nothing happens. No wonder he's having gut issues. There's just like, and so now that's one of the reasons I'm trying to get him something that can recreate something that he felt as a child, because he's just been left to atrophy, and they're keeping him alive. Great. Like, thank you. They're amazing, but there's only so much they could do. So quality of life, inclusivity, I would think, is a huge need. Taking them to the beach, getting them accessible beach wheelchairs, getting them, the ability to go to Disneyland again. Like, why can't we? He's just a little bigger. Why can't we make that work? And I don't know why. Honestly, I've been fighting for the last 10 years just to keep his life, just to keep the basic things stable. Now we actually, he's doing really well lately, and I'm excited. Now is the time, like, let's focus on quality of life. What can we do to include my brother, to not be overlooked, to get to do some fun things? And I think sadly, I think a lot of that is funding, resources, maybe more exposure to companies. They give a lot of great things to charity. Like, why not this need? Sadly, because a lot of these people can't talk. They can't post on their social media that, like, look what so-and-so did for me. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done, especially for someone like my brother, an adult disabled person. I think that bathrooms, for one thing. If he does go on a field trip, how do you, he has a Hoyer lift to pick him up, so the organization that he lives with, called Momentum, they've changed their name to Momentum. They actually have created these whole vans called Refresh, that they have wheelchair accessible bathrooms, and so we need more of those, and they need a company, and we need to get out. And so that's an example of a real tangible thing we could do.
I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because what you said, and you just nailed it, and it speaks completely to the idea of advocacy. Is after they phase out of the school system at 22, why shouldn't they still expect to have quality of life? I love what you said. Why can't their life be like day camp all the time? Why can't they be out and engaging people, and their lives enrich other people's? They don't necessarily need to be verbal to enrich other people's lives.
Right.
Just seeing it and being able to see, well, it makes people sometimes more appreciative of their own life. But yeah,
Right.
Speaking towards that in a wider spectrum, that as all these individuals get older, they still deserve to have the best life for themselves. And they deserve to go to Disneyland and go out in the public and be able to do stuff and not just sit in a room all day
Yeah.
and watch
Get
TV.
on a boat. Like I have a friend
Wow.
whose sibling used to live with Kevin. She's no longer here with us, but they
Mm.
own like this boat company. They take out, I just saw a post she did where they take out disabled kids for a day at the beach and they take them on these boat rides and how fun. But like, can we do that for adults also, not just kids?
Why
And
not?
she would agree, like she's fully in, but in general, like I think that adults are overlooked and perhaps I don't know what's going to come of this book. At the time of this recording, it's pretty fresh and I don't know. But if I can be of help of just give voice to that, like, wouldn't that be wonderful? And that goes to like finding purpose out of suffering. And I think how important that is for each of us to kind of like, what is the purpose in all this? Like, there's got to be more than just like getting by.
Well, and it
Yes.
seems like a little thing, but the whole restroom thing, it's not
Yep.
the first podcast that's come up and it's overlooked. But man, if you're in a wheelchair or changing adults or any of
Yeah.
these things and you've never thought about it, like that is a huge barrier to getting out there. I mean, we just talked to somebody else about having um, bringing in trailers that have
Mhm.
accessible bathrooms when they do events. These are game changing things for these families,
Yeah.
and making them aware. No one even thinks about it if you're not put in that situation. As soon as you're put in that situation, you realize how challenging it is, and there can be solutions with
Yeah.
people who are creative and willing to push into those needs. So.
And like you said, for all age groups, right?
Mhm.
Throughout. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
good.
and it's being done right now, at least by the organization I know that houses my brother and I think they have 7 vans now. But they say the demand is so strong, and they'll bring them to like concerts,
Mhm.
and so that special needs people or people with disabilities can go and they can know they have a wheelchair accessible bathroom. So it is it's a little thing, but it I guess it's not really a little thing. It's a big thing.
Mhm.
Oh, it's a big thing. It's so impactful. That
Mhm.
is so good. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Seriously. I know that you are the sibling, but when we look at from the parent's perspective, what advice would you have towards parents when they're raising their children and they want to foster that relationship between siblings? What advice would you have for
Yeah.
them to be able to foster the heart of that connection between siblings that I know you have?
It is such a great question. And I actually have thought about this because I've been asked that by somebody else recently. I think, first of all, acknowledge the reality that the siblings do also have their own unique form of suffering.
Mm.
And to ignore that fact, I mean, maybe the person will write a book and they'll work through it and go to therapy. But I think that it would be helpful if the parents could acknowledge that the parents are not the only ones suffering. And I say suffering, I want to clarify one thing is I don't mean that everybody's like always sad or like the disabled person is just, oh, it's just there's such a disappointment, they hurt. Like I'm not saying that at all. I'm using that as a global kind of term or language to indicate like something's not quite right. There's hurt, there's pain, there's like they're not as we expected, and their lives have limits. Reality, it's there. So I want to clarify that. But also, I think that the parents really need to be careful not to avoid those hard topics and pretend everything's okay when it's not. I
Mhm.
think somebody asked me on a podcast I was just on, like how did you guys deal with this? How did you guys talk about this at home? And when I'm like, well, we didn't. We really just didn't talk about it. It's like we kind of like pushed it down and didn't really give it much life unless we were there with my brother and then like we're like have a moment of like but for the most part you kind of put the mask on and you go through life. So I think allowing those siblings to talk about their feelings, to talk about what they feel like and to not force them, well, you need to take care of your brother, you need to do, because I feel like that can create a resentment and you don't want them to be resentful. You want them to like the love that this fostered is just the fuel that fuels them to do what they need to do to help their sibling as an adult. But I'd say overall, like for me, in a way, my parents did the opposite, where like they gave me so much attention that I actually had guilt that we weren't including Kevin more. And so, but other people who live with their disabled person, they may feel, and I've read this for many people and talked to many people, that they are overlooked. In fact, there's a term called, I'm sure you know, glass children or invisible children. And those are the siblings of the disabled, where they feel like the disabled kid is getting all the attention and the whole life revolves around that person. They can't take vacations because, well, maybe you do take a vacation and you either bring someone as a helper or you do it without the disabled child, once a year so that the other children feel included. And I don't have the answer. I don't think there's a perfect answer, but I do think that just being aware that there is stuff that sibling is carrying that may look invisible and they may not be aware. And so giving them a forum to talk and be honest, without feeling guilt, I think is going to be really important.
Yeah. It's beautiful not to hide those things and pretend, just brush it aside and pretend it doesn't exist, but to realize there is things going on. There is, realities that they're dealing with. You've done a fabulous job of presenting, your relationship with your brother, advocating, and so much. So one thing we always like to ask our listeners is, what is one thing that you would like our listeners to know that would bring hope for the road ahead?
If I had to say one thing, it really is, don't ignore the heart. I think we are holistic creatures, body, soul, and spirit. And I think that when, it's easy to say, well, don't ignore the body. Take vitamins, take supplements, get your vitamin D, get sunshine, eat healthy, exercise, all that. I think we all get that. I think the soul is, I've heard it defined, and I like this. It's like your emotions, your will, and your mind. Feed that too. So what are you listening to? What are you thinking about? How are you caring for those emotions? Like, are you stuffing them? Are you dealing with them? That whole area. And then spirit is probably the most ignored. And I think my book really is a lot about my own spiritual journey. So underneath all of the practical stuff that I share, I think it's when we surrender that, like, we can't fix it all, and that we realize that the world's answers can only go so deep, and that there's treasures to find if we look underneath the rubble, and like striving for, what is that inner joy? How do we have that living hope? And I think that if we nurture the spirit, there's always forward movement. There's always more. There's always discoveries. There's just beautiful things that we can learn that won't necessarily look like the hope the world offers, but it's probably going to be richer and deeper than that. And so as we go through the adventure of these things, the trials, like pushing through, not around, I think is our path to hope and to unexpected peace. So I think ultimately it's the heart, like all those things that we think about that are heart things. It looks like emotion, it looks like spirituality, it looks, so obviously I don't want to be the cliche answer. It's like, the answer is God, but it kind of is, it's like when we get to that wall and we get stuck, it's like the only way to go past that is, I think, your own spiritual journey and finding hope and faith in God. There's a lot of times when you feel like you have that suffering, that secondhand suffering, where you can't fix it. And, I'm a fixer, so I try to fix so many things. And there's a lot of things I can, and I've been successful in many things, and I'm really grateful. But there's those times when you just can't, and you just shut down. In those moments, one time I was able to put into words a feeling that I don't have this memorized, but I think it was a phrase that I did include in the book towards the end. So you'll have to read it to find out exactly where, but I was going to read this. I put it on a card. That meant a lot to me. And I think it just might help maybe. When we enter the deep space of empathetic pain and sit in it for longer than a minute, we are invited to enter a sacred realm akin to a holy of holies, a place where we can tangibly sense the presence of God. Here, our hearts connect with His, and His spirit intertwines with ours. In this space of entanglement, our deepest cries mix with our purest form of love for another person. And we find ourselves able to live in the space between heaven and earth, where the paradox of sadness and peace can coexist.
Camille, thank you so much. This has been just such a great conversation about advocacy and the heart and how to walk through this hard path of suffering, but also to come out the other side with hope and to live in that and to be able to thrive in that. And we're just so blessed by your perspective as a sibling. And we know this is going to be so helpful to so many parents and siblings, adult siblings out there. And we wish you the best, because we know that this book really, it speaks to so many types of secondhand suffering. And so I think it's going to go far and wide, but for our families, this just hits at the core, and it's just a beautiful story. So thank you for being vulnerable and sharing. And we have just had a delightful time with you. So thank you.
Thank you, guys. I love your organization. I can't wait to share it with others.
Check out the show notes to find resources and contact information for today's episode.
Yeah, and if you like the podcast, please share it with others and be sure to follow us so you won't miss an episode.
We love to hear from our listeners, so leave us a comment or rating and connect with us on social media or on our website at hopeonthehardroad.org.